Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.
I found a kid who swings a golf club like a dream. I'd like to try to qualify him for the U.S. Amateurs.
Coming to Apple TV Plus.
What's your name?
I'm not into older guys, but I'm flattered.
A new comedy series, Stick.
I don't want to go on this trip.
Your mouth's saying one thing, but those eyes are saying something else.
From the home of Ted Lasso.
This is your shot at redemption? This is your mulligan?
Owen Wilson.
This game takes and it takes. The game's finally giving me something back.
Stick.
You know Arnold Palmer?
Iced tea, lemonade, mix it.
I'm missing a nap for this.
Streaming June 4th on Apple TV Plus.
Well, I don't know, Gavin. Maybe the country would be bigger if you guys didn't use kilometers or whatever the hell it is you people use over there. Ass.
The following podcast contains...
Only I didn't say fudge.
And for gosh sake, watch your language.
Watch your profanity.
Right, I'm sorry.
explicit language.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that asks a simple question. You didn't believe your dad would turn this car around right this second? What the hell were you thinking? I'm your host, Dave Bledsoe, and this is episode number 461, Life is a Highway edition of the show. We talk about all the ways parents kept their kids shut up and quiet on road trips before smartphones. Stay tuned. The What the Hell Are You Thinking podcast is brought to you by Rodney's Roadside Retreat, where the fun is it. If you're on the road looking for gas, a place to eat, relax, unwind, a hot meal, and maybe a shower, you best keep on driving because at Rodney's Retreat, we got only gas. Some few snacks and that spinning rack of tourist crap brochures that can tell you all the places you would visit, but won't. Rodney's is a one-stop shop for people who have no time and no interest in tchotchkes like magnets for your fridge, snow globes with the Wisconsin State Capitol in them, and t-shirts with kissy crap written on them. You stop at Rodney's Roadside Retreat, you take a piss, fill up on gas, and buy some meth. That's it. Any sex workers you may or may not encounter are not affiliated with Rodney's, so buyer beware. Rodney's Roadside Retreat. Get in, gas up, and get the hell out.
It's Happy Highways from Stuckey's. Happy Highways is a brand new travel game with plenty of excitement. Wow! Go to Moon Mountain. Advance to Camp Gitchy Gooch. Detour. Lose a turn. Stop at Stuckey's for super shakes, delicious hamburgers, and yummy candy. Happy Highways is free with purchase of 10 gallons of gasoline or more at all participating Stuckey's stores.
Stuckey's is fun.
I used to consider myself quite the road warrior.
I rather doubt that.
No, really, I've made the cross-country trip 3 times in my life, 2 in the back seat of my family's car and once behind the wheel. And as someone who has done this grueling trek that many times, my advice to you is,
do not fucking do this.
You take a plane, you take a train, you wait for technology to develop the teleportation device like on Star Trek. Anything is better than driving 3,000 miles across this big-ass country. I obviously have no direct knowledge, but I've read the indifferent stars above about the Donner Party, and based on my personal experience, I would say that driving a modern automobile is only slightly better than a covered wagon, if not as likely to result in cannibalism.
That's when the cannibalism started.
When I did the drive myself from Northern California to Washington, D.C., I took Interstate 80.
Poor bastard.
I-80 passes through Oakland, Sacramento, Reno, Salt Lake City, Omaha, Des Moines, and Toledo, which are places that,
And also, no one visits here.
And these were the highlights of the trip. The rest of the miles were mostly just corn. Miles upon miles of endless corn. Sometimes it was wheat, but mostly it was just
corn.
Stephen King wrote The Children of the Corn after driving through Nebraska.
Did you make that up?
Yes, but it's plausibly real. I did the Heartland in 2 grueling 14-hour legs, stopping overnight in North Platte, Nebraska, after nearly 7 years of driving through Nebraska. Then I picked it up the next morning, where I drove another 6 years to finally reach Iowa and left Nebraska. And you know what I found in Iowa?
More corn.
Well, at least the corn was green, which is more than I could say for everything west of Nebraska. Honestly, I think I just zoned out all the way through Wyoming. I know I had to pass through it to get where I was going, but I have no recollection of it. I could have been abducted by aliens outside Salt Lake City and been dropped off to Nebraska as some kind of cruel alien joke. I'm firmly convinced that Interstate 80 is 13,000 miles of Nebraska and then a few hundred miles of other places it might happen to pass through. And this was before they raised the speed limit, so I had to make the trip at no more than 65 miles per hour, which made a long trip cruel and unusually long. And yet, it is still marginally better than the time my family took Interstate 40 across the entire United Goddamn States. Which brings me to this week's topic, the family road trip before videos in the backseat of cars and smartphones created what I like to call
the special hell.
Not gonna lie, pod friends, there was barely a theme holding this show together. And they can't all be killers, sometimes you're just gonna get some filler. But I'm gonna do the best I can. As I mentioned in episode 340, Wall to Wall and Treetop Tall.
That's a plug.
America is a nation that loves to drive. We have one of the finest highway systems in the world, mostly because other nations have invested their money in things like a railway network, so they didn't need to build massive highway systems.
Bunch of pussies.
The man we have to thank for this amazing feat of engineering is President Dwight David Eisenhower.
I like Ike.
After Ike had whipped the Nazis' ass, he found many things in Germany that he thought would work well in America. Mainly Nazi scientists who had done some pretty terrible things during the war.
Can't make an omelet without breaking an egg.
But he was also quite enamored of the
Autobahn.
Not the nihilists from the Big Lebowski, but the highways that Hitler built. Now, Dolphy built those highways to rapidly move troops from one side of the Reich to the other, and Ike decided that we should have something like that in case the godless commies should get a wild hair and try some shit like that over here in America. Wolverine! The idea wasn't new. FDR had explored it back in the 30s as part of the New Deal. FDR's idea never took off because that whole war thing, but when Ike took office, America was in the post-coital glow of atomic sex. The economy was booming, and the tax rate on the rich was something like 90%.
Comic bastards.
Also, in the 2 decades since the Roosevelt Plan, America had seen an exponential growth in car ownership and necessarily an exponential growth in traffic on the roads. So the smaller plans of the New Deal were upscaled for the new now. Enter the Federal Highway Aid Act of 1956, aka the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act. It spent $25 billion in federal funds to build 41,000 miles of interstate highways, around 10 times that in modern dollars. In an electoral sleight of hand, some of that money came from the swelling defense budget, ostensibly to bolster the ability to ship tanks from Kentucky to California, even though at the time, our railway system was still actually much better suited to doing exactly that sort of thing. The federal government would pay 90% of the cost, with the states chipping in on the remaining 10%. It was a great deal for the states and the kind of thing that only a strong federal government can do, which modern Republicans seem to have completely fucking forgotten. Construction began immediately, connecting existing interstate like roads into the system, and would continue for decades. The first state to complete its section of interstate was, ironically or not,
Nebraska.
In 1974. The final connection of the system, and thus the completion of the original plan, did not take place until 1992, when the last stretch of I-70 was completed outside of Glenwood Canyon, Colorado. The entire project took $618 billion in modern money, and that was around 6 times the estimated cost, and took 35 years, which was actually a bargain compared to, say, a 3-mile extension of a New York City subway line, which has taken twice as long and cost as much as the GDP of a moderately sized European nation, and is still nowhere near completion.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
The interstate system can be reasonably said to have created modern America. It is an economic lifeline and carries 26% of our vehicle traffic on just 2.6% of all the road coverage in the country. But I didn't come here to talk about any of that.
Damn it, Dave.
I came here to talk about driving across the country with your parents before there were such things as DVD players in the back of your minivans.
Those were dark times.
When my family took its first cross-country road trip from Oklahoma to San Francisco, where we would leave our car to go on a boat to Guam.
Guam? Really?
Yeah, not my choice, I assure you. We motored off down Interstate 40 to what seemed like a huge adventure, a 5-day trip across America, where we would see stuff.
Hello, Grand Canyon.
What it was in reality was a week-long passive-aggressive shitfest between my sister and I over who was on whose side in the back seat.
She's on my side.
Which, I want to be perfectly clear, 4 decades after these events, she was on my side of the seat again. I'm shocked my parents did not toss us into the Grand Canyon. In order to ameliorate this dissension, our parents invested in a minuscule amount of money into distractions from the oasis of the American interstate highway system.
To Stuckey's!
Children of the modern world do not know the glory of the Stuckeys. The Georgia-based roadside shop provided everything one needed across the vast expanse of nothingness that is the heartland of America.
And may I suggest you trying our famous pecan roll?
I'm not going to lie, that maraschino cherry nougat rolled around pecans was a hell of a snack, And it will wire your kids up like they're on a 220 current, which is why you also need to buy your kids stuff to do in the car. And Stuckey's entire inventory was based around this very thing. What is a Stuckey's, I hear you asking? Well, you see, back in 1937, a Georgia pecan farmer had a problem. He had a lot of pecans, and nobody was buying them. So he started making candy and selling the candy to roadside shops throughout the South, where they were immensely popular. This caused this guy to open his own store selling pecan rolls and sundry other foods like souvenirs, and it was immensely popular.
I can use this for so many nuts.
By the 1970s, there were 368 Stuckey's in 30 states across the South, Midwest, and Southwest. You could get gas, snacks, food, and most importantly, shit to entertain your kids. A favorite of mine were the puzzle books that came with that yellow highlighter that revealed the mystery answers. My sister and I would while away tens of minutes with those before going back to fighting. Then there was that water game with the little rubber rings you tried to land on pegs using water pressure that you squirted up from the bottom. A game like 5 minutes of sheer mind-bending fun, and then back to punching each other. Or who could forget the draw a face game with the magnet pen and iron filings? You could basically just give the guy in the picture a beard, but it filled up several seconds. There was that triangle peg game with the golf tees that my mom had to take away from us because we tried to stab each other with the pointy end of the golf tees. Mostly, we just got comic books and a dire threat to sit quietly in the back and read, or else.
Or else what?
Oh, we never asked that. That would not have been wise. What I'm saying is all this diversion and distraction could be purchased for a nominal fee at the roadside oasis that was a Stuckey's. Sadly, Stuckey's has fallen on hard times. Only 50 of the roadside stores remain in operation, leaving modern children to suffer the long drives with only the infinite diversion of the internet on their mobile devices, which are, probably toxic in the long term. At least with mandatory headphones, parents can get a little peace and quiet as the long, bland miles of interstate pass endlessly in front of them. I would have killed to have been able to watch a movie as a kid in that car. Just give me something to do besides fight with my sister and stare out the goddamn window or read this Archie comic for the 8th fucking time today. Sadly, this wasn't possible in 1983, so the only thing I could look forward to were the mandatory fun activities my parents had thoughtfully gleaned from the Rand McNally Road Atlas section titled Shit to Stop At for 20 Minutes so you can stretch your legs, take a piss, and entertain your goddamn kids.
Great title.
Long before we took our first road trip...
Well past that, haven't we?
Look, I told you, I barely got a theme this week. What I'm saying is when I was a kid, what we had was...
Rock City Gardens, located just 6 miles from downtown Chattanooga, is a unique geological and botanical wonder atop Lookout Mountain. This popular attraction features a self-guided tour on an enchanted trail that winds through rock formations, caves, and gardens with over 400 native plant species.
It was a place which I have never been to. It was, however, emblazoned on every barn and fucking birdhouse from the Tennessee-Virginia line to the Chattanooga going south, and a similar distance going north in Georgia. What was Rock City? Well, it was a roadside attraction featuring a rather large number of rocks. It's the kind of place that dots the highways and byways of this capitalist land for the sole purpose of extracting a few dollars from parents driving their children long distances and needing them to keep them entertained and from stabbing each other with a golf peg. As my family traversed America, we would pause along the road to take in such sights, usually against the stringent objections of those of us in the backseat who found them, quite honestly,
boring.
It was the trip from Oklahoma to California in 1983 that exposed our impressionable minds to such works of art as Amarillo's The Cadillac Ranch.
It looks like a low-key brothel.
I wish that's what it was. At least that would have been interesting. Unfortunately, what it was a bunch of old Cadillacs brightly painted and half buried in the Texas sod. From roadsideamerica.com, quote, standing along Route 66 west of Amarillo, Texas, the Cadillac Ranch was invented and built by a group of art hippies imported from San Francisco. God, how bad did you fuck up in San Francisco to move to goddamn Amarillo, Texas? They called themselves the Ant Farm, and their silent partner was an Amarillo billionaire, Stanley Marsh. He wanted a piece of public art that would baffle the locals, and the hippies came up with a tribute to the evolution of the Cadillac tail fin. 10 caddies were driven into one of Stanley Marsh's fields at the summer solstice, and then half buried, nose down in the dirt at a 60-degree angle. Supposedly the same angle as the sloping sides of the Great Pyramid of Giza. They faced west in a line from the 1949 Club Sedan to the 1963 Sedan DeVille. The tail fins held high for all to see on the empty Texas Panhandle, unquote. As a 13-year-old, I assure you that my reaction to this site was both in character to a 13-year-old and also brutally honest.
This is stupid.
As we left Amarillo, we began to see road signs every few miles for some place called Tucumcari. Every 20 miles or so, there'd be a huge billboard reading Tucumcari tonight and X number of miles to Tucumcari. Now, no one in my family had ever heard of a place called Tucumcari. Sounded exotic, exciting, maybe even a little magical. Even in our jaded hearts, my sister and I began to anticipate seeing this magical place in the middle of New Mexico. Tucumcari, of course, was a major stop on the old Route 66, that near mythic American highway predating modern interstates. And as the miles counted down, the decision was made by my parents that yes, we would enjoy Tucumcari tonight. We would stop there, take in the local scenery, and find out what the buzz was all about.
Of course, this is just Tucumcari we're talking about.
Tucumcari was not magical. It was a hole-in-the-wall town of 6,500 people and a few shitty motels, tacky museums, and one hell of a marketing department. The best reason to stop there was to buy meth, and the worst reason to stop there was because of dumb road signs on the side of the highway. We did, however, get to see our first real cowboy. At least it was a dude with a Colt 45 on his hip doing laundry at the same laundromat that we were. So we decided he must have been a cowboy. And as we crossed into Arizona, we had to stop at an Indian reservation, where my mom bought some turquoise jewelry, an Indian doll, and my sister and I some authentic Indian headdresses and a rubber tomahawk.
Isn't that a little racist?
Yes, it was, but in our defense, it was the 80s, and the people who sold them to us were actual Native Americans, and I don't know if that makes it better or somehow actually makes it worse.
Worse.
As I mentioned earlier, my family did stop at the Grand Canyon, and my sister and I were unimpressed. But we did see something, or rather someone in Arizona that impressed us all very much. As we stopped in food for Kingman, we were in a Denny's just finishing up our meal and heading back to our car when a bright yellow Penske truck pulled into the parking lot. And out of the cab stepped a man in a sequin jumpsuit, platform heels, and a slick-back pompadour hairdo. Pod friends, it was none other than the King himself.
Mr. Elvis Presley.
The King swaggered into that Denny's and straight into the shitter, which was a very Elvis thing to do. What the King was doing in Kingman, Arizona, driving a Penske truck, we may never know, but what I do know is we saw him, and my entire family will testify to this happening, and it remains one of the coolest things that ever happened to the Bledsoes in all of time. I mean, I'm sure it was almost certainly an Elvis imitator on the way to Vegas, but fuck you.
It's still real to me, damn it!
The remainder of that trip was fairly banal. We took the 40 to the 5 in California, and if you've driven that stretch of nothing, you will know there is only so much entertainment you can get out of Barstow. And after a few days in San Francisco, where the most enthralling thing was my mother refusing to drive her over any of the cool bridges because she was afraid of an earthquake, we flew on to Hawaii for a few days, which was fucking awesome. And then we flew on to Guam, which was less awesome, but kind of interesting. A few years later, we would do it all over again, only further north and from further east. Because after we turned from Guam, we visited our home in Tennessee and then drove from there to Idaho along Interstate 70. By this time, my sister and I were a bit older and less inclined to punch and scream at each other. We mostly just spent the trip with our Walkman jammed in our ears, trying to pretend the other did not exist. Our parents made sure we got the full cultural experience on this trip as well, including a side trip to Cocker City, Kansas. Why would we go to Cocker City, Kansas? Because basically it was the only thing in Kansas to see. Of course, I am referring to the,
It's like some kind of giant ball of twine.
Indeed, the world's largest ball of twine. A roadside attraction that my father drove an hour out of our way to go look at a very large ball of string. Why did my father do this 2-hour excursion?
For spite!
It was basically to torment his children, because my parents share a sick, twisted, almost perverted sense of humor, and they did it because they knew their children would hate it. Also because it's kind of famous, and if you're an American, you're driving in the vicinity. And when we arrived at the world's largest ball of twine, Pod friends and I can attest to you, it was indeed a very large ball of twine. As we passed through Colorado and paused to visit our friends and the family in Colorado Springs, we did not stop, but we were able to glimpse Herkimer, the world's largest beetle, a fiberglass 10-foot-high, 16-foot-long West Indian Hercules beetle built for some reason in Colorado, briefly relocated to Florida, and then returned to Colorado. Why this was done is a mystery. I mean, the bug was built for a so-called Museum of the Tropics, which was an odd thing to build in Colorado. Then the museum relocated to Florida, taking the bug, which was put on a flatbed truck and driven from Colorado to Florida. I can only assume that they stopped at the world's largest ball of twine. And the relocation to Florida at least made some geographic sense, but then the museum in Florida closed and it moved back to Colorado, where it is still at today. If you should find yourself in Colorado Springs, perhaps visiting family, friends, or perhaps you're about to attend the Air Force Academy, then by all means, stop by and see Herkimer, or at least drive past Herkimer and comment, as did my mother, quote, "That is a very big bug," unquote. You know what? She was right. It was and is a very big bug. Also, while you're in Colorado, you can look at the Rocky Mountains, which I have to say are basically just the Grand Canyon in reverse. As we turned north out of Colorado, our family began to see signs not unlike what we saw on our previous journey. Signs proclaiming the existence of a magical place called Waldrug. Each sign we saw said so many miles to Waldrug, a place which still exists and proudly plops their signs across the western United States today. The story behind the place is actually interesting, unlike this episode of the podcast, and instead of Stuckey's, I should have written about the Waldrugs and how American GIs took Waldrug signs all around the world during World War II, and it became world famous despite being a nowhere town in South Dakota. From a 1999 article in the New York Times, quote, "Today, even after a little store that had been expanded to a 75,000 square foot colossus of Western kitsch with an enclosed mall, dozens of shops selling everything from t-shirts to expensive boots, you can have wine with your buffalo burger in the 400-plus seat restaurant, a summertime staff of 250, and an array of corny free attractions like a cowboy orchestra that plays every 15 minutes. The quintessential way to experience Waldrug seems to be to stand at the wall of clippings, reading about people standing at the wall of clippings, reading about people standing at the wall of clippings," unquote. And this is not even mentioning the 80-foot-tall fiberglass dinosaur, much bigger than Herkimer. Waldrug brings 2 million people to the town of Wall, South Dakota, population 600, most of whom work at Waldrug. But you know what? My family did not drive north out of our way to Waldrug.
Why not?
Because we had seen Tucumcari.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, "Fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again."
So we turned west and drove on to Idaho, which is probably a bad idea, but at least we weren't going to live in South Dakota. Now, when I made my solo trip, which was likely the last time I will ever need to traverse the continent, barring some post-apocalyptic road trip in an up-armored Penske truck with an Elvis impersonator and a preteen girl with a secret to curing whatever plague has caused us to set out in the first place.
Could happen.
Where was I? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't stop to take in such sights and diversions as a giant ball of twine. I drove as fast and as long as I could. I drank coffee by the gallon to stay awake, to make up time, and then lost any of that time I might have made up by drinking coffee by needing to stop and piss after every 50 miles. And I did that mostly at night. And while I did see some things at late-night truck stops along I-80...
called sex workers.
I tried to make the trip as quickly as possible. Did I miss things like the world's largest paper airplane or marble collection in Nebraska? Yes. Did Indiana's answer to the Cadillac Ranch car hands pass me by? Again, yes. Did I forego passing through Riverside, Indiana, the future birthplace of Captain James T. Kirk? Fuck no, I made damn sure I drove there. It was only 25 miles off the 80, and I was in a hurry, but I wasn't that big in a hurry. This is where Kirk was born. Well, not was born, will be born. We'll just have to consult Dr. Dan Streetmensch's book to figure all of that out. I also stopped at the world's largest truck stop in Walcott, Indiana, but that wasn't because it was a sight I needed to see. It's because I just really needed to take a piss from all that coffee. And you know what? For all I've complained about it, I think every American child should see the country from the back seat of their parents' cars. And I think they should do it without their goddamn phones. Because the vast empty plains, the bleak barren deserts, the endless miles of corns, the shitty roadside attractions all teach us something about what it means to be an American and about what this country really is. Incredibly fucking boring. They can take all this knowledge and with it, move to the parts of the country that have fucking things in them. I mean, even the Molly Pitcher Service Plaza on the Jersey Turnpike is more exciting than the goddamn Stuckey's. If the kids see the great nothing, and that is most of this nation, they will want to leave that great nothing and move to the coast where they might not see a big giant ball of twine, but at least we got bars that stay open past 10 p.m., and we don't feel the need to advertise our inconsequential shithole towns for hundreds of miles in either directions to lie to travelers that stopping there is worth their time. I will say, however, for the record, I was wrong when I was a kid about the Grand Canyons and the Rocky Mountains. They're kind of cool. I mean, not giant ball of twine cool, but still kind of cool nevertheless.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
That is it for the show this week. Look, I told you, this week's show was thin on topic and long on bullshit. So if you're here at the end of it all thinking, I've got some sort of pithy summation on the foibles of modernity, well, I just got to say thank you for thinking so highly of me. I just really had a Stuckies and a show hopper forever and decided to force it as a topic, and here we are. If you'd like to kick us $1 for pecan rolls, head on over to patreon.com/whatthehellpodcast and drop it in our grubby little hands. I promise all that money goes to buy Gavin a t-shirt that says I went to Tucumcari and all I got was this lousy shirt. Rate and review us wherever you get your pods so other people can find us and listen to us as they cross the country in their road trips while their kids watch skibbity toilet videos on their tablets. Do all the things Jeremy tells you to do in the closing credits, otherwise he will be forced to turn this podcast around and make you listen to it from the start. And so for me, Dave, life is like a road that you travel on when there's one day here and the next day gone. Bledsoe, producer.
From Mozambique to those Memphis nights, the Khyber Pass to Vancouver's lights. Those places are not remotely close to one another.
Gavin! And all the fictional Stuckey's employees on this podcast, we want to say, life is a highway, and we want to ride it all night long. Sounds great, but you do have to stop to take a lot of pisses. And we'll see you all next week.
What the Hell Were You Thinking stars Dave Bledsoe and features Gavin St. James and several fictional minions. The show is produced by Kimberly Steele and a part of the Seltzer Kings podcast network. You can find more information on the show on their website, whatthehellpodcast.com, or on Twitter at @thehell_podcast, or on Facebook as What the Hell Podcast. Thanks for listening.
I have no ending for this, so I take a small bow.
Sometimes you have to roll the hard six.
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.